Eddie Van Halen has nothing to do with this story, but he was born on January 26, 1955, a day that is also pretty much meaningless. A quick look through the archives of the entire world reveals that two high schools in St. Louis, Missouri played a game of basketball. Maplewood defeated Kirkwood. Okay, maybe we're getting somewhere here. Kirkwood Garvey scoring world's smallest postman 18 points. Dick Reuter. You mean to tell me that Dick Reuter played basketball for Kirkwood High School? A totally different person from Dick Reuter, the co-founder of Kirkwood Mountain Resort. The guy this lift is named after. The man who may or may not have made the call to close the Cirque. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself.
The mountain, a 2,000-foot vertical drop. The place, Kirkwood.
This is the current map of Kirkwood. It's remained about the same for a while, but back in 1972 when the Reuter family decided to call this place home, only 4 lifts existed. A few years prior, that number was 0, and its one access road wasn't even plowed in the winter. There was no power, water, sewer lines, or paved roads, but what Kirkwood lacked in infrastructure, it more than made up for in geography.
2,000 acres of the ultimate ski experience.
I don't know what I've talked myself into.
If you've ever been to Kirkwood, you know how insane this mountain can get, but within its boundaries lies one gaping black hole that's impossible to ignore.
The Cirque has never been open to the public. It's 1,300 vertical feet where competitors can choose a variety of lines.
Kim, you've been on top of some of the scariest mountainsides on the planet. How does the Cirque measure up?
This is unforgiving terrain. If the competitors aren't careful, they'll find themselves tumbling to the bottom of the mountain in the blink of an eye.
The Cirque is a place that really fascinates me. It's by far the most exceptional piece of terrain at Kirkwood, and the very first time it was open for competition, the announcers told a blatant lie.
The Cirque has never been open to the public.
Here's a map of Kirkwood from 1976. There's a run called Carnell's Couloir that clearly begins in the Cirque. That would not be marked if the territory was already off limits. 3 years later, it mysteriously disappeared, and by 1987, the Cirque was officially labeled as a closed area. Something took place between 1976 and 1979, and this video would end right here, if not for an insane stroke of luck. It happened during my final ski day of the season, on the Cornice Express, approximately 2/3 of the way up. I was talking to a man sitting beside me, and somehow, we got to the topic of the Cirque. Turns out he had heard a story. One day, Dick Reuter's daughter was skiing in the Cirque and triggered an avalanche that swept her down the mountain. She survived, but right then and there, Dick decided that Kirkwood's most extraordinary terrain was too dangerous to remain open. I searched for hours to find anything corroborating this story, but I discovered nothing. The only piece of information I can confirm is that the map of Kirkwood changed in the late 70s and never went back to how it was before. All I could think to do at this point was take a closer look at the man who supposedly made the call.
Here's a guy that I'd really like to work for. This is a guy that gets out in the ditch and does it with you. He looks like Paul Bunyan.
Do you want to guess where Dick Reuter was on June 6, 1944? Normandy Beach, driving a bulldozer into France during the infamous D-Day invasion. When he got home from the war, he worked as a logger before settling into an area then known as Squaw Valley. Initially, he cut trees to clear out runs, but in 1955, he became a ski patrol leader. That job title probably doesn't scream danger, but one of his primary tasks was avalanche mitigation.
These slopes near the top of Squaw Mountain, so good for skiing, have quite a history of destructive avalanches.
Explosives were introduced to the process in 1957, so in years prior, ski cutting was the only available method. This technique is still widely used today, but never on massive faces like the one under the headwall chairlift. That's precisely where Dick Reuter triggered an enormous Class 5 avalanche, which carried him a mile before spitting him out with nothing but a pulled ligament. Throughout his tenure at Squaw, the man became a legend. He worked the 1960 Winter Olympics, which is where he met and married his wife. But his most unbelievable story came a decade later. On December 8, 1970, he was working atop a tower for the emigrant chairlift, then slipped, falling 50 feet and landing on a snow vehicle. A weaker man would have died in that accident, said Alan Cushing after promoting him to mountain manager. But Dick Reuter didn't occupy this position for long. After taking a trip to Kirkwood in 1972, he decided, right then and there, to move into this remote valley and help build the mountain from the ground up.
I came to Kirkwood in 1972. I wanted to meet the man who did the hiring. All of a sudden, in come this giant man that smelled like a 55-gallon barrel of diesel.
Reuter was the real deal. He did what he said, and he always followed through with purpose.
There was nothing that he would ask you to do that he wouldn't do himself. He was our hero.
If I could say anything about Dick Reuter, I only wish that I could be like him.
Every account of Dick Reuter paints him as a man who knew the mountain better than anyone else. Think of what he went through in his life before closing the Cirque. Nobody on Earth was more qualified to make that call, and it has never been overturned. Well, for the most part.
Yeah, the cool thing about Kirkwood is, of course, the Cirque.
It's about 1,700 vertical feet, pitch ranging anywhere from 30 to 50 degrees, so there's a lot of variation in terrain on this.
All right, Hotel Boy, now let the dogs out over here. This is John Bell, back here, is from the Resort Sports Network. Let's see what you got here. It looks like vegetation. It's a big That is beautiful. Look at that. I got tears of joy coming out right now.
The years since have seen many competitions use this fenced-off zone as a venue, including the Freeride World Tour on 3 separate occasions. Spectators gather at the bottom of Eagle Bowl and watch in awe as the best riders in the world take on a gauntlet of danger that ordinary skiers will never get a taste of. Even in a controlled setting, the risk of skiing the Cirque is significant. On March 1st, 2011, Ryan Hawks took a little too much speed into a 40 to 70 foot backflip and hit a hard patch of snow. He was taken to the hospital and pronounced dead the next day. It's the second and most recent time someone has passed away competing in the Freeride World Tour. The same man who told me the story of the Cirque was there on that day to witness it. Dick Reuter passed away 3 months later after a long battle with Alzheimer's. I'm certain there are countless stories that have never made a newspaper or a documentary, and quite frankly, I'm lucky to even know the history of the Cirque. Several months after that chairlift ride, I started looking into the life of Dick Reuter, hoping to learn more about the man who built the mountain where I learned how to ski. In my research, I stumbled upon the Storm Skiing Journal and podcast hosted by Stuart Winchester, and decided to listen to an episode where he interviewed Ricky Newberry, Kirkwood's vice president. I had already given up looking for closure on the Cirque, but 1 hour and 12 minutes in, he asks this question.
So I want to talk about the Cirque a little bit. Talk about that terrain a little bit and why it's off limits.
You know, my understanding of the history is that it hasn't always been closed. There may have been an incident in there, maybe some snow released, maybe it was the daughter of the mountain manager and he came over the radio and said the Cirque's closed. And I don't know that everyone knew how to interpret that, but looking back in hindsight, it was kind of closed in perpetuity.
It's hard to imagine what must have been going through Dick Reuter's head on that day, but with everything I've learned about him, I don't believe he closed the Cirque because of one incident. It had to be weighing on him for years, but when his daughter fell victim, he got a very real sense of what truly mattered. We'll never know how many lives that decision has saved, and maybe that's the point.